In this video, we'll go over everything you need to know to use segmentation textures in Lens Studio 5. Alright, so let's start by adding our segmentation texture. Come over here to the asset browser and click this plus button, and let's search for segmentation. Now, the hand segmentation texture requires a different setup, so we're not going to go over it in this video. So instead, select the segmentation texture, and let's just go ahead and leave this name here. And let's select our texture. And over here in the inspector, we can see our options. So if we take a closer look, we have this segmentation type, and we'll go through these in a moment. We have the invert mask option, the feathering option, and the refine edge option. So we're going to take a look at what all of these do and how you can best use these to have a good segmentation result. Okay, so instead of just kind of like abstractly visualizing what the segmentation texture does and what these options do, let's go ahead and come over here and add a screen image to our scene. And let's just call it screen image. And over here on our image material, let's open this up, open the full inspector, and our base texture, let's set this to our segmentation texture. And here in the preview panel, we can now see our texture here. So let's come back to our texture and let's take a look at what our different options are. So right now our segmentation type is body. So let's open this up. These are the different options we have for what we can segment. So we have things like footwear, which I don't know if we have a good preview for that. But let's go through. So we have this full garment. So you can see it is segmenting the clothing. If we go to a full body preview, let's come over here to dance. You can see that's getting the pants and the jacket / shirt. We can change this to lower garment. We get just the pants. So if I turn off this image, you can see here's our person here. And there is the lower garment. Let's reselect this. We have the upper garment, of course. And just for kicks and giggles, the footwear segmentation does work this zoomed out. Usually I think that's a bit more meant for like pointing the phone down at your shoes, but you can see it's still picking up the shoes here. All right, so going back. So we also have body, which is going to select the entire body, so head, arms, legs, clothing, shoes, everything. We're going to skip the sky segmentation. I mean, that just segments the sky. So now let's talk about these portrait ones. So what portrait means is it's meant to be like someone's holding the phone, like taking a selfie. So if we do, let's say this portrait segmentation, you see we get a really bad result with this zoomed out look. If we go back to our original idle preview, you can see we get a much better result. Now, one thing you might notice about this is that our other segmentations, like body, you can see that the white part is over the person, the black part is the background. Basically the name is kind of saying what it's going to isolate. In this case, portrait segmentation, for whatever reason, it is segmenting the background instead of the person. So that's kind of like the only case where it's like switching kind of what you might expect. But this helps you choose just the whole person from like a selfie view. And then from there, we can grab just the hair, just the skin. Shoulder is going to be basically like the neck or shoulders down, so not the hair, not the head, not the face. And we can also get the face, or also the entire head, which does include the hair. Portrait segmentation is probably going to be the most common one we use. All right, so as I mentioned, that here we're kind of selecting the background in this case and deselecting the person. But if we come over to invert mask, that just swaps it. So we're just switching black and white, what we're segmenting and what we're not. So we come look at this hair one. You can see we're getting everything that's not the hair, and then the hair here is in the black. And we can switch that back if we want to select the hair. Okay, so I'm back on portrait segmentation. I have the invert mask option. And let's talk about feathering. So right now it's set to 0.5. I can take this down to 0. And you can see we have our result here. I can take it up to 1. You can see it's a little bit softer, but it's kind of hard to see the difference. So I'm going to turn off refine edge so we can better see what's going on. So if I have no feathering, we actually have this kind of blocky, pixelated segmentation texture. If I increase the feathering, we start to blur that edge. So now it's not as pixelated. And as we increase the feathering, it's a little blurrier. And all the way up at 1, that's when we get the most feathering. Now, refine edge is, I believe, a process applied on top of the feathering. And that is going to take our segmentation texture and try to more closely match it to the silhouette of whatever object we're trying to segment. So that's why we didn't see too much difference in feathering with refine edge on. So if we turn that on, you can see some areas where it's going to be a little more feathered. If we come, let's grab one of these people here. So you can see we have some kind of softness around the arms, the head a little bit. We turn the feathering down, it's a little more of a crisp, clean line. So I usually don't play with this too much. We can keep it as 0.5. I mean, the segmentation does a pretty decent job. So usually the only option you want to change is the invert mask. But as we'll see later, there are some cases where turning off refine edge and just using feathering can be a good idea. Now, one last thing before we go on to actually using the segmentation textures. You might notice that we have the segmentation texture asset, and we can choose our segmentation type. But if you do find that you need to segment two different things, maybe you need a separate segmentation for the skin and for the hair, you can duplicate this segmentation texture and just make sure you have a different thing selected here. So you don't want two segmentation textures both doing portrait segmentation. You're going to have some weird issues. So if you do need separate segmentations, just make sure you duplicate that asset and then change the segmentation type and just have one texture per type that you have in your lens. All right, so let's actually use our segmentation texture. So here is our image showing our segmentation. So I have the portrait background segmentation here. So let's go ahead and let's create a new screen image. So I'm going to select the full frame region. Let's add a screen image, and let's just call this person segmentation. And I'm going to come down here, and let's add an unlit material. I'm going to do that because it doesn't rely on any lighting in the scene. We'll call this person matte. If we select our material, you can see we have a base color, we have a base texture, and we also have this opacity texture, which is a black and white mask, like our segmentation texture. So let's select this image here, and I want to choose the person material, and let's change this to stretch, just to make sure we fill the whole screen. All right, so this is all white, and that is because our material, we have a base color of white. Let's go ahead and grab a base texture. We'll go with the device camera texture to grab the person. So this is exactly what the camera is seeing. Now let's grab this opacity texture. Let's choose our segmentation texture. So we can go ahead and delete this other one we created earlier, just so we don't have any confusion. So this is our portrait segmentation, and we've applied it, but we don't see anything. That's because we need to check two more places. Our person material, we need to change our blend mode from disabled to normal. If it's disabled, then it's going to ignore any alpha values or transparency. We're going to change this to normal. And then we also want to make sure that there's something behind her subject. So in this case, we have our other screen image showing the mask. And you can see that that is now showing it behind our person. So we've isolated just the person. And instead of doing our segmentation texture here, we could bring in any other texture we want and have like a virtual background. So this is the first case of using segmentation. Often if you want like a person cutout, if you're layering them in some two-dimensional scene or something like that. All right, so another area of segmentation can be really useful is if we are using particle effects and we want to make sure that they aren't going in front of the user and just seeing behind them. So for that, we're actually going to put our segmentation on the camera. So if you select a camera, you can come and take a look in the inspector panel. We have this area for a mask texture. This is where we would put that segmentation. So let's come to the asset library, and we want to look in the effects, and let's find a nice particle effect or something that will go behind the person. Let's see, let's Let's say this embers one. Let's say we want them in like a fiery environment. So we'll import that. And just to keep things organized, I'm also going to add a new camera just for the particles. So I'll call this VFX cam. And then we need to set the render target. And then I'm not going to go into too many details, but I'm going to put on a new layer. That's just because a layer is just kind of like which objects, it helps you control what objects are seen by the camera. So let's just call this VFX layer. And then when we add our VFX particles to the scene, we can select that and we'll say we want you just on the VFX layer. So only this camera is going to see those particles. And then if you need to in the scene, you can come over here and choose which camera is rendering first. So let's just have our VFX cam going first. Okay, so you can see these embers. It's cool, but it might be a little much having them in front of our person. So I'm going to select the camera, and in the mask texture, I'm going to choose my segmentation texture. Now you can see that I have the particles behind the person, but not in front. Now those are kind of light on that background. Let's try maybe the scene. Maybe that's a little easier to see some of the particles, but they're behind the person, but not in front of. Now, if we come back to our texture, I did mention that our feathering and refine edge options, this is an instance where I think it might be useful to change. Because we don't necessarily need that crisp outline. We could turn off refine edge and use this feathering to kind of adjust kind of that fall off around the person. So this might be a case where that's fine if it's kind of like feathered as the particles are crossing behind or in front of the person. This might be when you want to change that. If you want to be kind of like a soft, gradual transition or a harder transition, or maybe you do want refine edge on. Now, one thing I did do before I added this camera was I did turn off invert mask because we had that on when you were playing with the screen image before. So if you have your particles only on the person on the background, just check invert mask to make sure that you're grabbing the correct segmentation area. All right, now let's quickly talk about using segmentation textures in a custom material. Now this tutorial isn't about creating materials, so I'm not going to go into big details or dig deep into it. That will come in later tutorials, but I do want to show kind of how we can use those textures in the material that we are creating. All right, so I'm going to come back to my orthographic camera. I'll select that, and let's add a new screen image. Actually, we also want a new screen region as well. So we'll call this custom mat, so we don't get confused. Put the image in there, and I'm just going to put it to stretch. So there's our new image. Let's create a new material for it. So we come here in the asset browser to find the empty material. And let's call this green person. We're going to make the person's skin green using the segmentation texture. So I have that material selected. Now I want to add it to my image. So let's just drag that over. And now we have our green person material. Okay, so I'm going to double click on the material. And that's going to open our graph editor here. So if it opens up somewhere else, sometimes it might open up down here. You can just click and drag this and move it around, kind of snap it wherever you want. If you find that you get things messed up, go to Window, Default Layout, and that'll kind of reset, and then you can try opening this material editor up again. All right, so one thing I want to do is with this material, I'm going to come over to the inspector and pin that, just so we have the options up. Because I can also look at the properties for these kind of items here. Actually, let's unpin the inspector. Here, let's add something. This is going really great. I'm going to add a texture 2D parameter. There we go. So there's that. Sorry, this inspector pinning is still kind of new. And I have not used it very much. Okay, let's pin you. Okay, and there's that inspector. Speaking of awkward moments in tutorials. All right, we survived that. So I have two inspectors here. You can pin this one. So this is for our material, and this is for individual nodes inside the material editor. Or it should be. We'll see how well that works. Maybe we'll have to unpin and have more weird tutorial moments. Okay, let's get back on track. So we have this texture. Let's call this our base texture. This is going to be kind of like that unlimited. And we're back. Lens Studio obviously crashed. So here, let's make the stretch. All right, let's try that again. So I'm in my graph editor here. I'm going to right click, add node, and I want a texture 2D parameter. And we're going to call this base texture. All right, so we have that. If I hook it up, if I now select my material again, I have this input for base texture. Inputs won't show up here unless they end up connected to the shader. So just to show what's going on, let's grab our device camera texture. And let's add our material to the image. And now we can see our camera texture. So nothing exciting yet, but it's always nice to kind of visualize things as we build it step by step. Right, so I'm going to select this node, copy paste. Let's call this our opacity, or let's just call it segmentation. Segmentation texture. Now if we connect this, you can see we get this placeholder texture here. So we select our material. Now let's choose that segmentation texture. All right, so there's that. Let's select it. And for this one, we want to make the person's skin green. So let's change this to portrait to skin. And there we go. That's looking great. All right, so to make it green, we're going to multiply our base texture. And let's add a color parameter. So we're kind of going through fast. We don't give it a name. So let's hook those up. And let's jump back to our material. And let's choose a nice green. And now we get this nice green hue, but we want it to only be on the skin. So let's get our segmentation texture hooked up. All right, so we have these 4 channels, RGBA. Now, since it's a segmentation text, you might think alpha. I like to just grab one of the RGB ones because if we remember our texture, it's black and white. So the RGB values are all the same, and those are going to essentially be our segmentation. So I'm going to drag out from here, grab a swizzle. So this lets us grab just certain channels. You can use it to kind of change the order. I'm going to come up here to this little swizzle, just do R. And so that's going to now give us this single output here. So if I now connect it here, you can see we have our segmentation. Awesome. So what we want to do is we want to mix this with our original base image without the green. So, big surprise, we're going to use a mix node to mix those together. So we're going to take our base texture. We're going to have our green one. And we are going to take our segmentation stuff into the ratio. So at the mix node, if this ratio is 0, it'll show our input A. If the ratio is 1, it'll show our input B. Anything in between is going to be a mix of the two. So now we can come down here, and you can see we have just the green skin using that segmentation texture. This is all in a custom material. So really, all we need to do is just get that texture in there with the texture 2D parameter. We can swizzle out one of the values, and then we can use that for mixing or whatever. So this gives you access to the power of the material editor using the segmentation texture. And so that's just how you'd use this in a custom material. All right, the last thing I want to go over is how we can mix our segmentation texture kind of with the 3D object in the scene. Let's say that this person here wants them to be green, but let's say we have some 3D object we want to attach to them as well. And to do that, all we need to do is make sure the segmentation happens before we have those 3D objects. So you might think that sometimes people will put the segmentation texture on the camera, but that will kind of clip off your 3D object. So for those cases, I would just go where you have it on the image. So let's go ahead and use our little green person one here. I'm going to select this scene object in the asset browser. I want to make sure the orthographic camera is rendered before our other camera. So that means this is going to apply our green skin effect, and then this camera will render any 3D objects on top of that. So to show that, I also like to just rearrange in here so I can remember what is rendering first. Let's come to our asset library and let's just find a 3D object really quick. Here, let's add this. Let's go with the glasses. I used that in the previous tutorial, and this way we can overlay it over the segmentation to really show that things are working as expected. So glasses pack, put under main camera. So let's drag that in. And you can see our glasses are now on top of our person with the green skin segmentation. And the glasses themselves aren't being cut off. You can see it extends past the segmentation. So let's come to smile person 1 for that nice head turn. You can see that our 3D object is working with the segmentation. So if we zoom in, you can see it's really working. So the only trick to adding 3D objects on top of the segmentation is really having that in like a separate camera. In this case, we have to because it's a 2D effect in the orthographic camera. And then just making sure that order works out nice. So if we were to change this order really quick, now you can see it's kind of weird. And that's because our camera is rendering the glasses, but then the orthographic camera is coming in second, rendering that effect, and it's covering up those glasses. So if you find that that's the case, select your scene, make sure that camera order is correct so that your glasses are showing up on top of the segmentation and not the other way around.